Good morning, everyone. I am Val Brown, the Director of the Future of Learning at the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching. I'm very glad to be joined today by an awesome panel to talk about what it means to be a foundation disrupting the pre-K to gray. And so we're going to go ahead and get started. We have some fun questions and some meaningful questions to ask the group. And so everyone ready? We're feeling good? Awesome. All right, so as we go down this aisle, I would love for you to introduce yourself, talk a little bit about your foundation's work, and then just for fun, what is a personal purchase that you've made that you still regret to this day, all right? I'll start. So at the Carnegie Foundation, you all may have heard of the Carnegie Unit, also known as the Credit Hour. The disruption that we are aiming to do in this next generation is to figure out what do alternatives to the Carnegie Unit look like for schools, right? Oftentimes, the Credit Hour is used as a barrier to innovation. At Carnegie, we understand that seat time does not equal learning, and yet we need to provide models for the system to understand what some of those alternatives can be. So we're deeply interested in working with everyone out there who's already on the margins and making these ideas mainstream. A purchase that I regret, when my son was about 6, we tried the karate martial arts thing. Every week was a fight. We signed up for a year. By the last 6 months, we gave it up, and I bought him the next color belt from Amazon. So that's what that is. All right, Jean, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jean Eddy for American Student Assistance. At ASA, we start working with kids in middle school to help them figure out what their interests and passions are and introduce them to a myriad of careers that would align with those interests and passions. We work with young people directly through digital programs, not only to help them go exploring, but also to be able to test and try things. So things like apprenticeships, work-based learning. We have 4 products on our platforms which allow young people to do a whole host of things. But concurrently, we also work with school systems, with other foundations, with nonprofits to help have the work that we do digitally align and complement what's happening in our systems. So a regret, and I think there might be a theme going here, I would have to say that I have too many Y memberships. I really thought I lived between a couple of places, and I thought, well, you know, you should have one in both places because you're going to use this. And let me tell you, I don't.
Awesome. Thank you. Stephanie.
Great. Stephanie Khurana, CEO of Axim Collaborative. It's great to see you all. At Axim, we're focused on not just providing access to great courses, but driving impact for student success, and really focused on post-secondary and workforce, and really trying to think about what are the pathways broken between high school to post-secondary to career, knowing that a quality education matters. And as you know, our roots are with edX, where we started with access to broad courses, but realized that wasn't enough when there's 40 million Americans who are stopped out of their education system, and that's growing. It was up from 36 million 4 years ago, and currently there are 15 million who are currently enrolled, down from 18 million. And when you look at the stop-out rates that are 20 to 30% graduate, depending on what your income status is, that's a huge problem, and it's a problem for economic inequality in this country. It's a problem for economic competitiveness, and so we really look to innovate with digital transformations that help people engage in courses, persist through those courses and pathways, and then earn meaningful wages. And so our innovations are focused on those barriers and opening up those barriers and thinking about how we can help student success in using existing systems. So happy to share more examples, looking at bridging hybrid programs, looking at how AI can be inclusive with development, including research universities, but also community colleges and broad access universities, because that's where the students are, that's where the funding is, and I think that's where we can make a meaningful difference. So I would say my regret, this is a little bit revealing. I signed up for this yoga class, and I bought a book of 10, and I have yet to use them. I don't think I'm going to, but that probably says something that I probably should, so.
We understand, things change, things change. My fellow North Carolinian here, Joe, you're up.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Joe Watt. I lead up impact investing for ECMC Group. For those that aren't familiar, ECMC Group is a national nonprofit focused on improving access and outcomes in post-secondary education. We started about 30 years ago as a guarantor and have grown significantly over the years as a partner for the Department of Education, but have also expanded broadly in pursuit of our mission. So about 15 years ago, we launched a foundation that has become one of the largest grant makers focused on U.S. post-secondary education, and more recently launched what we call our Education Impact Fund, which has evolved into a sizable evergreen impact investment vehicle that invests both in fund managers, but also increasingly directly into companies across the early and later stages, with the idea of improving innovative solutions that are going to support outcomes for underrepresented students. So across our platform, we're deploying capital sort of across the spectrum of financial returns towards our mission. So a purchase that I regret, I have an 8-week-old at home.
Let's give it up for 8-week-olds. That's a big deal.
And we spent a lot of money on a diaper pail, which like has a fancy lid, and it's got like these special bags, and at the end of the day, you're just putting crap in a can, and it's still, it is what it is. So that's probably
Indeed.
it.
Awesome. Thank you all. All right, we're gonna dig in here. So the title of our session mentions the word ed revolution. So what would you say is the education revolution right now? And will we get to it fast enough for my sophomore and my freshman? Go.
I think what has been evidenced in all of the conversations we've been having here, and I would also have to say that every time I hear Michael Moe talk, I come out of it with all kinds of stats that I am going to use again and again and again. But I was talking to Tom Vander Ark this morning and saying that this meeting has been very sobering as far as the kinds of issues we're facing and the things that we need to do to make a difference. I think the revolution is that we have to provide different ways of learning for our young people. And that can be using AI, going directly to students, but also within our systems, and how we can integrate new learning models and hybrid learning models into what we have been, things that have been around for over 200 years. And to me, that's the revolution. We need to do it because I absolutely believe that the young people in this country don't get the information they need or the opportunities they need to have the future that they deserve.
No, I completely agree with that, and I think there's this question of how, because for some time there's been innovation in education and technology, but yet it hasn't yet reached all the students who need it the most. And when you look at how disruptive innovation happens, if you look at other sectors, you'll see that it happens kind of in a slow way, and then perhaps there's a tipping point that gets us further. And we saw that the internet back 30 years ago, in the late 80s, early 90s, it started becoming accessible to commercial. And then it became accessible to the broader audience. And at that tipping point in the mid-90s, you could start seeing much more accessibility. And I think we're at that point now with generative AI. What I worry about is today, even 30 years later, there's still 18 million households who don't have access to the internet. It's not affordable, and they can't access it, which means they don't have access to life's basic needs in terms of food or housing or social services, and yet we think they have access because the internet is ubiquitous. And so I think at this point in time, where I do think AI is going to help us unlock and break barriers of pathways, of new ways of learning, of new ways of supporting students through tutors, of new ways of thinking about how do we match labor force needs. But if we don't look at this revolution and thinking about who's left out now and design for that now and include those voices now, then I think we're just going to exacerbate the divides that already exist in our society. And that's something that I think we can learn from the past and how other sectors have shifted so that we avoid it today.
Thank you.
Well, and I think we have to have an honest discussion around improving access to funding for those solutions, for those alternatives, right? We can't expect students to go to, and they want to go, they're demanding alternatives to the traditional post-secondary experience. They want cheaper, they want faster, they want more connected to career pathways. But at the end of the day, their access to capital to pay for that is not changing. We want employers to hire on skills, but we're not significantly shifting the funding to ultimately enable those pathways. And so I think those two have to go hand in hand in my view.
Yeah. And the funding doesn't come just from the student. It exists already in the institution or the Pell Grants or the corporates.
Well, yeah,
so
the
who's
$100
knitting that
trillion
together?
Student loan market
Right,
is
exactly.
sort of the elephant in the room there, yeah.
Right, yeah.
Jean, did you want to jump in there yet before I?
I think one of the issues that we have contended with, and we started doing this prior to COVID, although I would have to say while we were in COVID, that it certainly seemed to play out. People would say to us, that was kind of fortuitous that you decided to do it this way. It was, but we had already planned it. Because of the fact that we don't have universal access across this country, the things that we are doing are through mobile devices. So when we work with kids directly, we are going with mobile devices. And the numbers, as certainly we heard about yesterday, the number of hours kids are on their cell phones is really quite dramatic. And so what we tried to do is invade that space so that we could provide students with fun things, but also educational things. I think we have to be focused more on what young people do have, and trying to get into systems that are just, the challenge is almost, so pervasive that unless we can come up with a workaround, which I believe mobile can be, we have to do something before we can fix the greater problem. There are 30 million kids right now who are in grades 6 through 12, and we have an opportunity to actually invade that space. I'm going to keep using that term, talk about revolutions and invading spaces. But kids are interested in beyond the classroom learning, and they are doing it through mobile devices. We have to use that more.
So what I really value is that you all aren't just talking about super discrete projects, but larger systems that need to be addressed. So what do you believe is your role, your foundation's role, your organization's role in driving this change? How broadly do you try to go, or do you narrow in on a few things and adjust the ecosystem around those particular items?
Sure, I can start. So, I think my role specifically within our larger organization, I've certainly tried to push us to take more risks. I think that's a privileged position that we're in as an organization, as a foundation, as an impact fund, is to really search out opportunities to take risk towards innovation, because I think at the end of the day, a lot of the other sort of mechanisms around investment in the space sort of, it borders on incrementalism, and I think that's not going to ultimately solve the problem. And so I think having the patience to see that through is really important. But I think, taking that risk I think is really, really important. And so doing that across grant making, across program-related investments, across market rate investments, and then using those in concert, I think is a really powerful tool that foundations and organizations like ours are maybe positioned to do in ways that others can't.
Yeah, and I think funding is a key piece and it's catalytic, and then I think the question is what do you pair that with to actually drive the change? And I think Axim's in a unique position where we do have some funding that we could catalyze, and it'll be for early stage activating, accelerating innovations that work, but then who else can we bring around the table that's necessary to solve the problem? And we talked a little bit about policymakers and whether you're putting together researchers together with other folks who are broad access, you look at data, longitudinal data that states have. So there's a lot of ways you can use data to drive outcomes and use digital innovations to help kids in the classroom and then help them persist through and connect to jobs. All of that is data and information that can be streamlined, but you need to collaborate in order to put those pieces together. And it could be state by state. I mean, there's states that are interested in connecting those dots and driving those innovations, bringing them together and thinking also about as funders that could help knit the pieces together. Those are all ways I think that change can happen, but this is a much bigger problem and the money is not enough to actually drive the change with even any of our dollars alone. It takes the expertise and aligning digital innovators to help solve this problem.
I would say we've approached it on a few fronts. I mean, certainly work directly with students, but I would also say that we do a lot of grant making with other nonprofits, with school systems, et cetera. We also do an educational impact fund, social impact fund, which really allows us to help companies who are also interested in this space to be able to make the kind of change that we're talking about. And I would certainly add to what Stephanie said, which is that research is the bedrock of everything. And so being able to have the information at our fingertips from all the initiatives that we do to make our case is particularly important. I don't think it's any one thing. I think it is all of those things working together that can make the kind of change we're looking for.
Yeah.
Can I just, I like totally agree with that. Both those points around bringing more rigor to impact measurement, I think that's absolutely needed. And again, an area where I think our organizations can invest to really lead the charge there, because I think at the end of the day, like, and the space has come a long way, I think, in the last 10 years or and more. But I think if you look at, if you look at surveys from Gin around like where the biggest challenges are within impact investing, it's still around more rigor and sophistication around impact measurement is needed. And I think we have to move away as an ecosystem from sort of the vanity metrics of we reached 30 million students or whatever. Like, what does that mean? Who is that helping? At the end of the day, like the solutions are going to get adopted if you're able to articulate very, very data-driven narratives that demonstrate that they're working for students. And that's going to ultimately have the best outcomes for the learners, for your investors, for your various stakeholders. And so I think, but we have to invest to make that happen. We can't just sort of ask the companies or the grantees to do it themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So those words, rigor, risk, patience, are making me think about for I think many people in the room as well, your grantees in the businesses, accountability and trust. So what is the relationship between accountability and trust when you are granting your dollars, investing in these companies? How do you make sure that you are empowering the people that you have put your investments in to do the work, and not become overbearing or think that you all have the answers?
Well, so I'll start, and some of this harkens from, I spent the last 10 years doing more impact investing and venture philanthropy, and this role of what's your relationship with a grantee is a really important one, because the idea is to have strong outcomes that are aligned, that everybody agrees on, and they could be at a high level. Like, for example, we agree that learning outcomes matter, like what we're putting in terms of our digital innovations. Does it help people learn more or not? Depending on who you are, do you learn more or not? Is there persistence? Is there some type of graduation? And is there some type of strong job, meaning you're earning more money perhaps than you had in your Pell Grant? So maybe we can agree on these high level outcomes, and maybe we talk about coordinating those so it's easier to understand, are we moving the needle for any given thing? Beyond that, it's really the trust of the people who are doing the work, who know what they're doing, and to have detailed reports and things. I mean, I don't know if you've been on the other end of grantees who have detailed reports that are so narrow that don't even allow you to innovate. That is not good, and it's not trust-based, and it's not, the accountability doesn't work in terms of actually producing the outcomes. And what actually does work is developing a productive relationship where you can share expertise and say, you're working on a student success dashboard to prevent folks who are getting D's and F's and W's. Let's learn what you're doing from there, and let's share that expertise, and then it becomes an empowering relationship. And so I would say that was the philosophy of grant making at DRK Foundation, where I was before. And once we shifted to that and started building that trust in a new way and investing in people who were proximate leaders, those outcomes then produce so much more.
Yeah, and before you jump in, Stephanie, I'd love all of your answers. Just a clarifying question around how much time do you think that takes? How much time are foundations and grant makers willing to invest in a company, and how do we help sustain the work?
Yeah, well, and I think of it as, I wasn't sure you were going to ask how much time does it take. It was like for whom, and it should take hardly any time for the people receiving the funds, and it should actually take a fair amount of time to give a framework and a way of thinking, and then actually designing it into the systems and the technology. If we're talking about digital innovations, we should be designing into what was the result of the problem set that the student was working on? Did it help or not help? That should be in the platform so that it will automatically then be shared. And so it does need to be invested in to have a framework that's clear and that's repeatable and scalable, but it should not be fully on the grantee.
Awesome. Do you want to talk?
Sure, I'd just like to add on to what Stephanie said. We have quite we have a template, a dashboard that we use when we start, giving out our grants. But I would have to say the real work comes in as we create a community of our grantees. I would have to say that not only do we learn about outcomes that we absolutely need to substantiate the things that we are doing, but also within this community, our grantees learn from each other and also are able to inform us about trends and things that are happening in those sectors, which is, particularly important. I would have to say one of the highlights of the year for me is we do an annual get-together of all our grantees, and people get an opportunity to basically get up and brag about their outcomes. So it's a pretty neat way to acknowledge what they are doing and what we are doing with them.
Yeah, I think it comes down to like values and vision alignment at the time, pre-investment or pre-grant. Not everything is going to be aligned with our mission, with your mission, and so not everything's going to be a good fit. But I think having a really open and honest discussion about that and making sure that we are aligned. We try to think about it from, what is their vision? What is their big, hairy, audacious goal for impact? What's their approach and theory of change to making that happen? And then are there elements of collinearity between that impact and then the financial outcomes of the business that basically ensure that you're not going to have mission drift over time, that ensure that the only way that the company is going to be financially successful is if they deliver the impact. And then there's the accountability piece on the post-investment. How do you work with them to develop and identify and develop metrics that capture that impact, but then also tie it to value proposition so that they're willing to invest in their product and make it front and center, because if it's not tied to value proposition, they're probably not going to track it. And so I think having those really collaborative discussions around what the right metrics are is really important. But I think as investors and grantors, we have a responsibility to also, like you said, collaborate and align so they're not getting 5 different investors asking for 20 different metrics every quarter. I think there's an incumbent responsibility on us to do it in a way that's efficient and value additive to the companies or the.
Did you want to add? Okay. Stephanie, I know you have some opinions about like this next question in terms of misalignment between a for-profit company, a mission-driven organization. The mission-driven organization is trying to adopt the newest innovation, and they have trusted a for-profit company that might not last longer than 5 years, right? Just share a little bit of your thoughts about investing in those types of companies and what advice you would have for organizations.
Right. So, I mean, what we're talking about is trying to open a market that's been really hard to crack before, which is how do you actually help leverage community colleges or even broad access institutions with new technologies that actually drive change. And if we're talking about the types of learners that I mentioned, a lot of them, there's not that much money in those markets, but what we can do is help to catalyze it by maybe investing in some research or figuring out how do you get off the ground. And that can be done with for-profit or nonprofit dollars. I think what the challenge is if you're misaligned with what the market is, how fast it will move and how fast it will grow, which by definition, if we're talking about a long-term transformation, it's going to take some time. And so where it goes off the rails is when you have investors who have shorter time frames and have bigger margin expectations, and it's not aligned with the mission that you said. And it's really all about alignment. And I think the biggest successes are when you find that alignment, you're able to deliver on it. And when you don't, then you have unhappy investors, you have unhappy founders, and you have unhappy constituents, and you sometimes end up doing harm, where you actually have to pull out of a market, and they were really counting on you, and that's not okay. So that needs to be designed up front, and it can be done, and I'm always happy to have those conversations to align the capital, to align the market, figure out the margins, figure out how to make a return. I don't know if Larry Berger is still here, but I brought him into an opportunity that was like, doesn't always happen. You get all the alignment and you get an outcome, and we sold that one to a public company, but it takes the hard work up front and the work on the business model to make sure they work. And it's really awful when it doesn't, because it's not like you just run out of money. You actually harm people. Exactly, you harm people, and that is not okay. So in this space, and I'm sure you face it in your impact fund, that's a problem. And we're not there with Axim yet in terms of doing the for-profit investing, but we have a lot of things that we can leverage to be able to provide a solid business for anybody who's interested. We have the Open edX platform, which is, you can download it and you can use it, you can innovate on top of it, you can provide hybrid courses, you can offer programs and degrees, you can add workforce data and align it. I mean, there's all kinds of things you can do to innovate, and that starts you on a low-cost position, but you have to start there and innovate with those learners in mind first, not last. It's not going to trickle down, and then you start seeing the outcomes, and then everybody's happy because you get a good return, and you also are serving the learners who need it most.
Yeah. Joe, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, I mean, Gina and I were talking in the green room about, I think, just some of the unique challenges to maybe folks on the foundation side or that are trying to move towards a more sort of market rate or risk on sort of approach of just building sort of trust and confidence at the board level. It's different than sort of an investor conversation, but it's similar in that you have to build buy-in about the difference in that sort of strategy versus maybe traditional grant making or other programming that they may be used to, because there are different risks involved, and it's a different level of patience, and there's going to be things that don't work, and it's just getting that up front has just been incredibly important for us, I think, and I would imagine for other organizations as well.
Jean, I know you fund nonprofits. What kind of alignment are you looking for in your grant making?
I would say that, within our grant making, we do a lot of nonprofit work, and we are in the impact investing space. And to add on to what Joe was saying about this, we have found that as we have been trying to support funds, and I would say direct investing, but we are pretty new to that, we are trying to develop more information in the career exploration space. There is more in work-based learning. There is more in opportunities to test and try in high school and beyond than there is in the first phase of exploration. And you have to balance the fact that there's nothing really out there, and being able to take a chance on a profit-making new company, new venture. And it is clear when you're working with a board who wants to make sure that they fulfill their fiduciary responsibilities, that you have to balance what you feel as though is going to be something that will really make a difference in the landscape of opportunities for young people versus the choices you make or the risks you take in investing in something that is that early stage. I would have to say that in the nonprofit space, given all the criteria we use, it is far easier to do that. And we find that we have to bring in additional expertise on our end to ensure that we're making the right choices.
I have two more questions before we open up the floor. One, what leadership skill has served you best in this role? And two, what's something that you funded recently that you're most proud of? So think on that. You all start thinking about your questions that you have for the group. I don't think they're taking any solicitations here, but maybe at the coffee break. Anyone want to start? Leadership skill or something that you funded most recently that you're pretty proud of?
I can start with something that we funded that I'm proud of. We came together with foundations to basically work in the state of Delaware. Delaware is, I just think, a neat space because you can get your arms around it. It's not that big. And Delaware decided a number of years ago that they were going to introduce career education and learning in all of their high schools. So it was the exploration space as well as testing and training, work-based learning, apprenticeships, et cetera. And then they wanted to bring that down into middle school. And so we came together with other foundations to fund that. And so now every young person in the state of Delaware, whether they're in middle school or high school, have an opportunity to go out and discover who they are, what they love to do, and how that relates to a career, and then be able to test and try it before they leave high school. So we're pretty jazzed about that.
Let's give it up. I'm taking notes for you all so you can take this back. So collaboration, ability to scale, mission alignment, and impact on young people is what felt good as a funding opportunity. All right, Stephanie, what you got?
Great. So I'll talk about, we haven't talked enough about in the classroom and the role of education and faculty and really leveraging that, because I think that's a really key piece to innovate on and not lose sight of that, because there's education and skill building are two very different things. And so one of the collaborations I'm proud of is MIT has access to large language models and OpenAI and really thinking about how do you innovate for learners. And with their CS class, they are loading their class and all the student questions and models, but that's not interesting enough for us because we really care about inclusion and inclusive innovation first. And so by tapping into faculty and students at Quintus Sigma and Community College and their CS class and their questions and loading those in and doing the prompts and understanding, and then also with Georgia State, who has tens of thousands of students and also worried about persistence in ways maybe that MIT is not, but questions they might have for their courses with their students. And they're amazing at measurement, to the point on measurement. And so we've got this really incredible collaboration where we're gonna learn a lot about what students are learning, what they're not learning, who's included and who's not. And it gets back to my point about we have to design first with everybody in mind, and we'll get a much better outcome. And so we're just in the early stages of that, but that's one I think is an example of how to think about innovation and the promise of AI, and then also maybe some of the pitfalls that we'll learn about too along the way.
Oh my gosh, I love it. So I heard open access, inclusive innovation, a grasp on measurement, and that promise that everyone will be able to be a part of this dream. Awesome, thank you. Give it up.
So two things come to mind. One sort of external investment, one sort of internal. So we've invested in a couple different things in sort of work integrated learning, one that's focused on apprenticeships, well actually two companies focused on apprenticeships, and then one that's focused on accessibility oriented career training, specifically for the blind and visually impaired population. And for separate reasons, both of those spaces I think have been generally sort of not overlooked, but sort of just sort of the rest of the investment community hasn't really focused there, and
Fair.
and for various reasons, scalability questions or market size, and they might be right, but I think there's also an opportunity to still have great outcomes in both financial and impact in both of those businesses. And so we ultimately led investments in those companies, and I think that's the opportunity for us when I talk about taking risks. Like, that's an opportunity of stepping forward, leading where others maybe aren't, and then ultimately doing our best to support the outcome. The internal investment that I'm really excited about is we've actually brought specific people and resources onto our team to support the shift towards rigorous impact measurement. So instead of just sort of asking the companies to bring more of that themselves, we are investing real dollars to hopefully help make that happen in collaboration with them. So that's something I'm really proud of.
Let's give it up for Joe. I'm out of time. I got him standing over me. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful rest of your session. All right.